Hi, I'm Dr. Mike, and this is NFGeeks. This video is another response to an Ask Dr. Mike question on the Facebook forum for NFGeeks. People ask questions for me to answer in a video on Sundays, and the winner this week was Ann Behrens, and her question is being answered with a video, so isn't that wonderful? Okay, so here's her question. I'll read it. Let's get right to it. I'm going to read it. It says, how does love between NFs manifest different for each of the types together? I remember you saying INFJ and ENFP were soulmate types, etc. Which do you think go together and why? Okay, that's the question she asked. That's kind of not the answer she's going to get, unfortunately, because, and not in a bad way, but I actually started thinking about this question, and this led me to some other ideas about relationships that are bigger, and I want to get to those. And if I can talk about ENFP, INFJ, I will a little bit, because actually some of that's relevant to what I'm about to say. But that question kind of opened my mind and made me think about much larger scope. So what I'm really going to talk about is what makes relationships work and don't work, and how does type affect that? That's actually what I'm going to answer. Okay, so the principles of relationship breakups and all that are actually going to be for any relationship, regardless of the type interaction. And then I'm going to try to throw in there how does type affect that. That's what I'm going to do. And so what I'm going to talk about, and some of you may be familiar with this, is I'm going to talk about the Gottman Research. Research done on couples and breakups and marriages that survive by a guy named John Gottman. And this is very famous research because he claims, and I think this is a legitimate claim of his, that he can predict with like 94% accuracy whether someone's going to get a divorce or not. Okay, and that's pretty impressive, don't you think? And the things he measures, I think, are accurate as to what causes a relationship to survive or not survive. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to talk about what his study says, just about relationships at all. Because remember, he's not coming from a typology position at all. He probably doesn't even know anything about it. But I'm going to talk about what he came up with, which is sound, as you're going to see. And then what I'm going to do is throw in our stuff, throw in personality type and how that helps or hinders this situation. Okay, because I think that'll actually be a more helpful answer to her question, even though it's not directly answering her question. I think this is actually going to help her because it's going to help all the types simultaneously. That's why I'm doing this. And it made me think about all this too, just the question itself. This all popped up. Now, all right, so let's get to it. So first I'm going to talk about things that he says and then try to throw in the stuff, okay? So what's interesting about his research, it isn't so much how relationships work well. It's really about how relationships handle conflict. So when the relationship's breaking down or when there's problems, and how it's being thought about and how it's being approached determines whether a relationship fails or doesn't, or a marriage. Specifically talking about a marriage, but you can think any relationship, I guess. But whether or not a relationship lasts has to do with that, okay, with how the conflict is handled, and not on other things, like more positive things, like how good things are, spirituality, nothing. That actually isn't the predictor. It's conflict and how conflict is reacted to by the couple, okay? And so here we're going to start with the bad stuff, because he always starts off with the bad stuff, and he calls them the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Yeah, I love that term. Which is interesting. The reason why I love it is because he's Jewish, and very sort of devout Jewish. He wears the yarmulke wherever he goes. And it's interesting that he picked Christian metaphors for this, So it's not a criticism. I like it, but it's just interesting that sort of juxtaposition. Now, here's with the Four Horsemen, and then I'll explain them. So these are the four things that if they exist in a relationship, your relationship is doomed. Okay, this is absolutely positively things you don't want to have. These are predictors of divorce. That's what he said. And they are contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Okay, those four things. So the worst one, he says, is contempt. Contempt is basically thinking you're superior to someone else. Okay, insults are from a place of superiority always. The insult is always that you're defective and I'm better than you. That's one area. Criticism, is this critiquing of a person's personality. Here's everything that's wrong with you. Okay, defensiveness is counterattacking. It's hearing something and saying it's not me, it's you, that kind of thing. And stonewalling is withdrawal and sort of stomping your feet, not stomping your feet, but digging in your heels and withdrawing from the discussion or whatever and just sort of zoning out. That's stonewalling. Okay, so those four things are very bad. Contempt being the worst. Okay, eye rolling. That's bad. When there's eye rolling going on, you're on that plane's about to crash in that one. So, what do I have to say about type then? I feel that what happens is, I think if these issues are going to be type specific. Okay, first of all. So what you're contemptuous of is going to be related to your type. Something, an insult that puts your type or your temperament higher. Okay, that's going to be one thing. You're going to critique people on their type, the failings of their type. Okay, you're going to be defensive about critiques of your own type. All right, and again, what's going to make you withdraw is whatever's going on that you don't want from the other type. Okay, that makes you want to shut down and close off. Okay, so we got to talk about. So now we can answer a little bit of Anne's question, and that is how do what types go together? Because I think that makes a difference here. First of all, it seems to me that, let's start with the sensors, that there's a lot more combinations that can go on between the sensors than there can between the intuitives. So, for example, just within SJ and within SP, it seems that there is a little more incestuousness. And that's a joke. But my impression is that for example, SJs, any SJ can be with any other SJ. Okay, and make it work. And same thing with SP. Any SP can be with any other SP and make it work. And I think that's because of the perceiving function being not only just the same, but running in the same direction. So there's always a part of the process that is identical. So there's an there's an introverted sensing between the SJs that they all share. Okay, so there's always part of them that's connected, and I think that that also leads to more connections between SP and SJ. Okay, that's not as true with NF and NT. Not any NF combination works so well, and not any NT combination works so well, and not every NF NT combination works so well. There's less going on there, so there's a little more room for conflict between NF and NT, and between the NFs and the NTs, rather than between the SJs and the SPs. I think. I once read in a study about typology and relationships that one of the strongest predictors, at least minimally, was if the perceiving function is the same. Everything else can be different, but the perceiving function must be the same. Intuitives must be with intuitive, sensors must be with sensors. When that is switched, with intuitives or sensors together, that's when you have possibility for breakups and things. Another interesting thing, two other things, and then we'll get into the four things here, is that when there's opposite types, shadow or whatever, opposite types together, those relationships always fail. I read this, except one, and this is going to blow your mind, but because you would think this would be one of the ones that tanks, but the one exception that survives always is ESTJ INFP. I know. I said the same thing that you're saying right now hearing this. It seems batty to me too, but it showed it had a chart, it had the whole thing in the article. What can I say? It said the data pointed towards that. The other thing I want to mention that's of interest to me too, personally, it's of interest, is that the combination that the highest satisfaction rate of all possible combinations was ENFP. ENFP had the highest level of satisfaction about the relationship, about the partner, about whatever is going on. That was the happiest of all marriages, was ENFP. That gives me hope. It really does. I have hope because of that. And I could see it. I'd love to be with another ENFP. That would be the best thing ever. What a party that would be for a relationship. Dare to dream such dreams. So, all right. So what does that have to do with this? I think the problems of contempt, criticism, defensive stonewalling are results between the types, particularly when we have types from different temperaments. Okay, so for example, think of criticism, or criticism and contempt. You can see that between different types. A criticism and contempt of an NT. A criticism and an insult to NT would be like, well, maybe if you weren't such a heartless Asperger's, loser, you'd be able to handle this job situation. That's a criticism, and it's a criticism, but it's also contemptuous, because what's implied in that, because that's an NF talking, and the implication is, well, I'm an NF and I have empathy for people and I can handle social situations. I am better than you. Okay, see, that's contempt, and that's it's not just, the insult isn't just an insult straight up. It's also a a superiority thing that goes on. Now think about it between other types of types, SJ to NF. It's going to be insults, serious insults, about you can't have your act together. Why can't you just go to work and pay these bills? You don't understand how I feel. Don't you get that this upsets me? You're such an insensitive twit. You're a lazy jackass. There's all the contempt and criticism going on right there. The counterattack is a critique or a contempt. Keep that in mind. See, they all interlock with each other. So, and a defense is going to be again, it's going to be a critique of the other person. Very much so. NFs, I think, are the most cutting in this, because nobody can get inside your crap like an NF. Okay, it won't just be SJ stuff on the surface, like why are you so rigid, you stupid SJ? It'll be like, well, if you didn't grow up with alcoholism and sexual abuse in a country that didn't respect women, and therefore you always had this self-loathing, the NF goes right in, right through. We're particularly adept at doing that, and I think that's because this is about relationships. So, and I'm saying that because I can see the NFs listening to this whole thing and be like, well, that's not us. Contempt, criticism, couldn't possibly be talking about NFs. Those are the SJs and the SPs. Don't do that. We don't do that. That's a bad thing. Now, related to that in type 2 is, there's 3 things you shouldn't do in a fight. Say, one of them I've already mentioned, contempt, which is insults to superiorities. But the 2 that we shouldn't do, that we always do, and boy, type fits into this, is sentences that begin with you never, or sentences that begin with you always. Okay? Because that is going to be about type stuff when we're talking with each other, and temperament stuff. So, saying to the SJ, you never, or the NT, you never care about my feelings. Or to the NF, you always overreact. Okay? Now, there's 2 reasons that's bad. Is one, they're criticisms. I mean, it could be defensive things on your part, but they're criticisms. They could even have some contempt in there. But they're irrational defenses because, one, they're never true. NTs never care about their feelings. Never, 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 never. It might be infrequent. Okay, even that's a stretch, but it never is impossible. It can't ever be never, Or you are always insensitive. Always, they're always 100% insensitive. That can't be. And it also isn't looking and accepting type and temperament within the relationship. That's what's really bad, and that's where it leads to defensiveness and contempt. You know what I mean? Because if you're married to an NT, yeah, they're going to have some trouble sometimes respecting your feelings, because they just don't. It's just not part of their thing, you know what I mean? They're not going to be sensitive all the time. You married an NT, you have to really, clue in on that. It's not that they're evil. They're not trying to break up the marriage. They're NTs, accept it. Same thing, if you're an SJ married to an SP, yeah, they're going to be not really thinking through how this is going to be damaging, okay? There's going to be a point where the thinking of the consequences drops off. But it's not always. It's not they never think about the consequences, never ever. That's crazy. And on the other hand, they're SPs. You have to go in and understand that they're SPs, and you can't have this expectation that they're going to have everything that you have as an SJ or an NF or an NT. Okay, those things destroy relationships. All right. So let me review. On this, because we're gonna have a part 1 and part 2. So what's the bad thing? Contempt. Contempt is bad. That's insulting and feeling superior. Criticism is critiquing the personality flaws. That's what it's about. Counterattack is defense, is counterattack, and stonewalling is sort of digging your heels in the sand, and not doing anything, zoning out, and not even interacting. One last thing I want to do before I go, and that is that some of you are going to say, well, critiquing, isn't that a good thing? I'm giving feedback. No, There's a difference between feedback and critiquing. Feedback is letting someone know how something impacted you. So it's really about you. You're not critiquing them and saying why you're a jackass and why did you do this stupid thing. You're not saying any of that. Feedback is saying, here's what you did and this is what happened to me. So I felt blah, 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 blah. That is feedback. Critique is that you're a jackass because of this and you don't know what you're talking about because of that, and if it wasn't for the fact that your mother didn't raise you correctly. Okay, that's criticism. That's bad. Okay? Because again, there's contempt in there, superiority. Well, I'm not as fucked up as you. And that's why I'm superior in this relationship, you know. So we have to think of all that and how it relates to type, because type is interacting with that and creating the disconnect, especially if we're talking about sensors with intuitives. Okay, but again, as I will show at the end of the second video, doesn't matter if you're the same. Two NFs will still do all of this. Okay, all right. So on to part 2.